John Johnson is a humanities professor. He's quite famous in that world.
In my family.
My Everyone in his family
knows
him. He publishes a lot in this area, and really, if you're around people in his world and drop his name, it's magic. Then they think you're wonderful because you know him. So I mean, it's a small world, but still, if you're in it and you drop his name, and John, I'm going to tell him. John is one of our music professors, and he was just commissioned to write music for the inauguration of the President of the United States.
Wow.
So, so we're...
Which one?
We've had this conversation.
For this
So,
one, right?
it's going to be a dirge.
I like to be for one.
Yeah, Requiem. So anyway, they're great guys, and they agreed to come over here on a late afternoon and talk to you about this. So I think, John, you're going to go first.
I am.
Okay, go ahead.
We should come here more often. That was really nice.
Was it?
Yeah.
Did we get that?
Is that recorded?
Thanks. I'm happy to do it because I love this topic. I love it. I am myself, born and bred in Christian education. I have how some people are kind of entrenched deeply in Lee, generation-wise and everything. I'm kind of that way actually with Covenant College. I went to Covenant College. All my siblings went to Covenant College. Both my parents went to Covenant College. My wife went to Covenant College. Her siblings went to Covenant College. Her dad is on the board of Covenant College. My brother's the vice president of Covenant College.
Her Covenant Mafia.
Her granddad started Covenant College. I teach at Lee University.
Rebel.
I'm the rebel, and I love it here. But I love thinking about Christian education and what it means. It's so part of me. And so what I think I'm going to do is try to set a kind of ask some foundational questions about what in the world it means even, and then try to turn it a little bit practical. And I'm not knowing the audience at all, not knowing exactly the backgrounds of everybody. I'm going to start by just recommending, because I don't know if anybody has. Obviously, you're teaching at a Christian institution, so you've given it some thought, but I don't know just where everybody's coming from. I'm going to recommend a few basic starting points. If you haven't read these things, I think this couple of things are good entry points if you're looking for, all right, everybody's talking about this stuff, but one is, it's an old book, but it's short and pretty good. It's Arthur Holmes' The Idea of a Christian College. There's been a recent attempt at updating it, and I think that's useful, but it's a good sort of short introduction to some of the vocabulary. That takes the kind of Christian worldview approach, a kind of presuppositionalist. But one thing that book will do is it'll get rid of two errors that used to be far more common than now, but two errors. One error in thinking about Christian education is the error of thinking that and it's the error of parents more than anybody else, but the idea that, Christian education is education that utterly separates itself out of the world. It's basically the old Bible school model of education that says, all the yucky stuff that people are learning in those other institutions, I want to send my kids to a place that doesn't teach that. What they need to learn is a very select. They need to learn the Bible, they need to learn theology, but not the stuff that's going to take them out of this world, or keep them in this world, I should say. I think that's sort of an error that some colleges in the past tended to, and some parents, that's what they think they're getting when they want their kids to go to a Christian college. They want to kind of separate. Then the other error is thinking of Christian education as basically, it's normal education with prayer. It's just school, but you're surrounded by Christians, there's chapel, and you pray, and then you just get an education. in fact, the phrase that's so often used, integration of faith and learning, I've never been really in love with that phrase because I feel like it gives away the boat. It gives it away from the beginning. It suggests that you got education to one side, you got learning on one side, you got faith on the other side, and the job of a Christian college is to figure out how to mix them up. And I think that already starts with a pretty bad premise. Starts with them separate. So, I mean, I know what we're getting at, but the idea, the integration of faith and learning, since it already assumes that they're disintegrated or separated in some way, I think already starts from someplace else. So what then is it? We talk about Christian liberal arts. What in the world is, well, what's the liberal arts anymore? What is it now? I mean, we can think about the history of liberal arts. It certainly doesn't look like its history. If we say that this is a Christian liberal arts college, what in the world does that mean? And so, I want to give you my take. I think, as the name implies, I think we have to hone in on that central concept of freedom. Wherever you are, whether it's a so-called secular liberal arts institution, whether it's an ancient liberal arts approach, or a modern liberal arts approach, I think one of the commonalities is that everybody's after freedom. That's what it's after. Freedom of the mind, freedom of the soul, freedom. It's after unshackling us, is the liberal arts, hence the name. Those arts that can free our minds. It's not so much, even though, it used to literally mean this, a particular set of a classification for learning. It's kind of liberal arts, but it's certainly shed that meaning more or less. But I think it's aimed at freedom. But why I think Christian liberal arts is right liberal arts is because it's the Christian faith that recognizes that freedom is not principally autonomy, that freedom is always freedom to something, or rather freedom to someone. That freedom is not autonomy. True freedom entails submission. And that's kind of the paradox of the Christian faith. True freedom entails submission. Remember, when when the Lord called Israel out of Egypt, it was not just setting them free to go wander off. He called them out of Egypt to himself. Let my people go, that they may come and worship me. And it's been true ever since. It was true of the ancient church. It was true of the people of God before and after Christ's appearing. And I think it's true now. Freedom entails submission to God. True freedom entails submission to God. So we, at a Christian liberal arts, we recognize that and I think that's kind of foundational. True freedom is freedom to God. And that can't really happen outside of the context of Christian faith, I believe. Second, so we're not only freed to something, I think the Christian faith has a more comprehensive view of what we're freed from, obviously. We're not merely freed from behaviorism. We're not freed, well, frankly, we're freed from the comprehensive effects of sin. I think the approach to Christian liberal arts recognizes the utter, comprehensive, and ongoing effects of the fall on all of creation. There is the moral effect that must be dealt with. We must be freed from our guilt in the legal sense, in the theological sense. But we also need freedom from everything that sin produced. What sometimes is called the noetic effects of the fall. The fall has messed with our minds. And not only that, it continues to mess with our minds because it has set up patterns of thinking, patterns of society, patterns of politics. Everything in the world is a giant ripple effect of sins. Sins have real consequences, and we're dealing with those, and they shackle us. They shackle us in real ways. So foundationally, we need to know that freedom entails freedom to something. It also entails an understanding of the comprehensive effects of sin. And if education is going to free us from those effects, we need to understand their causes and sources. I think also another foundational principle is the radical political nature of the kingdom of God. It's not a metaphor. It's not it's not just a viewpoint on the world. That's where worldview can sometimes mess us up. It's not just a tint that we place on things. It's the fact that all authority in heaven and earth was given to Jesus Christ, and he took that authority and used it. And he sent his people into the world with the Great Commission with a particular command and a political message saying, my kingdom is the true kingdom, not a metaphorical kingdom, not a storybook kingdom, but a more real kingdom than any kingdom on earth. And the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ. And that's radically political. I mean, it's amazingly political. And has real consequences for our lives and real consequences for our students' thinking. And most importantly, it has real consequences for their dreams. So foundationally, to start by understanding that we need to be freed, and the freedom we need is to someone. We're called to freedom to worship God and serve him because his kingdom is the true kingdom, frankly, changes everything about everything we do. And we've got to start there. We have to start there. If we start there, then it seems preposterous to consider Christian education as something we add to education. I mean, that's just a preposterous notion. That and so it gets us tangled up. We get tangled up in questions of content, as though the real question were whether or not the Christian faith changes 1 + 1 = 2. We get bothered by those kinds of questions. That question is not really relevant. Or some people, 1 + 1 = 2, but just notice that the plus sign looks like a cross. So there you got Christian education. It's not really that at all. It has much less to do with content, I think. It certainly has things to do with content, but it has a lot more to do with practice. It has to do with the shape of our pedagogy. And that's where the rubber meets the road practically. All right, so I've discussed the two kind of common errors, the foundational principles and freedom to and all that. But what about the practice of Christian education? Where does it meet? So I mentioned dreams. So I said one recommended reading is Arthur Holmes' The Idea of a Christian College. It's a good starting point. Another more recent, and probably many of you have already read this, but if you haven't, I highly encourage you to pick up You Are What You Love by James K.A. Smith. They're both very easy reads. You will love reading You Are What You Love. If you haven't read it, you'll just enjoy it, and it'll help. But one thing he and others have pointed out is in the last generation of thinking about Christian higher ed, the focus has almost accidentally been entirely on the work that scholars do. What does it mean? What does it mean for your work as a scholar? And there hasn't been nearly enough work done on, but what does it mean as a teacher? Because most higher ed Christian institutions are teaching colleges like this one, where the emphasis is very strongly on the practice and art of teaching over against the scholarship, the very important scholarship. But all the work has been done on what are the implications of Christian liberal arts and Christian education on scholarship. So now there's a lot of thinking being done on what are the implications for the practice of teaching. And that's the fun part, and that's where I think our work is exciting, and where you need to be working and where I need to be working. So let's try to instantiate this. I mentioned that all those foundational principles affect our dreams and the dreams of our student. If we actually understand and believe that the kingdom of God is real, not metaphorical, that it's political, which means it leads to action, and that it's inevitable, which I believe that the kingdom of God is an announcement more than it is a call to action, but join it or not, it's a coming. And that's a fact, You know, it's a proclamation, it's an announcement. So given that, it totally changes our dream. So, speaking of dreams, I was recently in conversations. I'm gonna mention it. Aaron thought I should go ahead and mention this, but just because this is how we can so easily talk about Christian education and somehow go off. It's because it's one thing to think thoughts. It's another thing to actually change what we actually dream about, which is one of Jamie Smith's discussion points. It's very easy. We're not just thinkers, and so it's not a matter of coming up with a proposal or a proposition. It's a matter of actually reorienting our desires and loves so that we love the thing we're supposed to love, and we teach our students to love the thing. And that doesn't happen by teaching them, giving them a sentence or two, or a stunning devotional, you know. So I was with some of my colleagues. We were talking about School of Music, and we were talking about creativity, and we were talking about some things. And one of my colleagues innocently said, you know, what we really need, you know, what we need to do is we need to help our students dream bigger dreams. It was wonderful. It was like a Mr. Holland's Opus moment. It was all terrific and everything. Sounds great. But as the conversation went on, people were talking about what dreams. What was said was a little bit alarming to me. What was said was, you know, our students, you know, they sort of think, well, I'm going to be a band director in Bradley County, or why not big dreams like the Academy Awards, or you know, or going to the Met, or you know, big dreams. And now those who are saying this, they certainly wouldn't, if you asked them, do you think that material success in the world will make you happy? Nobody says that. Nobody thinks that. But the problem is we have habits of desire that lead us to say things that we would have never thought we would have said. We would never say that our goal is essentially material success. Not at a place like this. I don't think anybody would say that. And yet our habits of thinking, our habits of desiring, lead us in ways that we don't intend. How much of that do we give to our students? I'm afraid of the answer. I'm afraid how much of my pedagogy, not in what I say, but in some of the things that I haven't even thought about, the ways that I encounter my students day after day, over the course of 4 years, some of my students are going to see my habits, and I'm going to insist on them having habits. They're going to shape them in ways I didn't even think about. I think that's the location right now for the work of thinking about what it means to be a Christian college. It's examining the pedagogical practices that are shaping our students' desires in unintended ways. This could take any number of things. I'm not skilled in thinking about this. I'm working on it. The decorations in our hallways. What are they? Our students are going to walk down our hallways thousands of times. Those hallways are going to shape their imagination one way or the other. How do we approach the devotional? Are we teaching them the thing we mean to? Is our practice of, for some of us, giving the prayer or devotional at the beginning of class, is that unintentionally teaching our students to separate faith and learning? By saying, here's the Christian part and here's the learning part. I don't know, we have to think about this. What are the habits and practices? I think that's probably a good place to stop. Do you think?
Okay.
Probably so.
Sure.
We want to definitely leave time for questions and things.
Yeah, so I want to actually pick up right where he left off with the practices of pedagogy and what it is that we think we're doing. So I don't know what your background is. You're all new faculty or you're mentors of new faculty. When you came here, what sort of habits you've already been socialized into living out in the classroom, in the office, in the conversation, just in your life at Lee. But for me, I went to a small undergraduate Christian university, Colorado Christian University. Then I went to secular schools, and then by and large, I was teaching at secular universities or Christian universities with a Christian heritage somewhere in the background. Not an intentionally Christian university, not a CCCU sort of university. And so when I came here, I had been schooled in how to see myself as a scholar and a teacher in all sorts of ways that I've been having to unlearn since I came here. So part of the reason to have these new faculty orientation sort of seminars that you have to come to when you are doggone busy in your first semester at Lee is because we want to, early on you want to start getting at least, be baited into a conversation that's going to end up taking a lifetime, which is, what does it mean to be who I am as a Christian scholar, as a Christian teacher, etc. And so one of the things that I found, and I frequently tell people I'm just embarrassed by this because I've been teaching for almost 10 years before I came to Lee. What I had just thought about being a Christian teacher meant do it with excellence, okay? And of course, what did I mean by excellence? By excellence, I meant they need to have the skills requisite so that they could get into a good graduate program and sort of show off with their intellectual capacities. In particular, in regards to dead languages. I am a classicist, I do classics, I work on Greek and Latin. And so what I thought of when I thought of what does it mean for me to be a good teacher, I need a student I can be proud of, which means somebody who has mastered very difficult languages and is able to read with facility these sorts of languages and potentially read texts in those languages and ask interesting questions and find interesting answers. And that was it. And so I came here and I was thinking, that's what I want to do. But of course, I recognize I'm in a humble East Tennessee Christian university, and so a lot of people aren't going to go to grad school. So can I be proud of a student who wants to go on and teach at a Christian high school or something like this, get paid peanuts, be frustrated all the time, etc. Or am I, or go off and do anything else? I had a student in my very first year here who said, I'm planning on getting married to this guy, and I want to just be a stay-at-home mom. I want to homeschool my kids. And so I had to wrestle with, can I be proud of that student equally the way I would be with a student who's going to go off somewhere else? And one of the things that I came to realize, especially by reading this guy, Jamie Smith, he's become sort of a popularizer, so it's easy to refer to him. But he had written a book called Desiring the Kingdom, which is sort of continuing the project of the book that John mentioned. And he said, education is most fundamentally not about information. It's not about passing on that information, that teaching, those skills, etc., and having them do that well and successfully. In fact, most of what education is about forming the person. It's about formation, not information. And I found this to be actually quite embarrassing that I came to it so late, but it's because I have been formed by practices, even though I had been formed by an education that had told me that information was what mattered and that your morality didn't matter, your vision of your broader vision of what it meant to be human didn't actually matter for being a successful student or the successful teacher of the successful student. That in itself is a moral choice that I was being schooled in before, in these other educational contexts. So I come here and then we begin to become more explicit about this, as just through conversations and things like this. Be more explicit about the fact that our job as teachers is forming. It's about formation, not just information. And for the first time, I was able to begin to think much more holistically about who I am. I come from a blue-collar background. My dad dropped out of school in 7th grade, and he actually told me, it's okay for you, if you want to drop out in 7th grade, look at me, I did fine. I said, no you didn't, Dad, you're doing construction work, I don't want this. He's having me work on the job site, and I'm a nerd, and I'm reading books that, when everybody else takes smoke breaks, I'm off on the corner, they make fun of me and things like this. But so actually, most of what I learned about how to teach, I learned from my father. And he does drywall construction work, which is doing stuff on the interior of houses or buildings to the walls to make it an appealing structure after, it's putting up walls and ceilings. That's what it is. At least by the age of 5, he was teaching me how to spot nails, which is you get drywall mud and you cover up these nails so it's not going to come through when you paint the wall and things like this. And so he would get me doing this, and I'd get a nickel per every nail that I spotted. And so he would stand over me and say, "Look now, look how the mud is too thick. You're going to just wear yourself out trying to. Oh, it's too thin now. This is how you mix the mud." And he would stand over me. I remember this very vividly. Him standing over me. I'm a little 5-year-old. I've got this big drill, and I'm supposed to drill this bucket of mud, and we're mixing it up. And of course, and he's holding around me, and I'm just shaking my little butt, my little body, working this drill. And it was all these sorts of very tactile way. Yes, he was passing on some information. I learned the names of various tools. I learned and things like this. But most of what I learned, I was gaining a certain vision of how to look at mud. Most of you don't know what to look for when you look at mud. Okay, you do if your dad's a drywaller and he wants to train you to be a good drywaller. Okay, you don't know how to carry sheetrock, up flights of stairs without really hurting yourself, especially lots at a time, so you can minimize the number of trips you got to make upstairs. You learned that you picked this up as a teenager. If your dad's a drywaller and he's forcing you after school, picking you up and taking you to the drywall site, you learn how to look at a wall that's kind of kinked out and is sort of weird, and you're trying to do something with it. You know the range of options that are before you for how to deal with certain problematic situations, as well as the more ideal situation that's really easy, and then how to do it quickly. So I was learning all these sorts of things, and my dad was teaching me. Okay? And when I went off to college, for instance, there were a whole host of ways in which people were standing over me while my little 5-year-old brain, still in a college body though, is shaking itself while it's looking at a difficult text, or while it's trying to solve the problems of the universe, or while it's trying to study for an exam, or to write a better paper, or things like this. And so much of who I am and who you all are as your products of your undergraduate education and your high school education before that, and then your graduate education after it, is a result of all sorts of forces that you actually weren't paying attention to. But they were shaping your vision, they were shaping your sensibilities, they were shaping your values and your standards and what you thought this whole thing was really about and how you fit within this whole thing, whatever that was and how it was defined. And so lectures absolutely matter in the classroom, but so do conversations in the hallway and ad hoc meetings at a cafeteria or at a coffee shop, or things like this, or bumping into a professor who happens to have a book under his arm, and you say, "What are you reading?" And he says, "Oh, this is actually a terrible book, but maybe you should read it sometime," or something like this. All those sorts of little things, so they set up this whole constellation of significance and meaning, and who are the people that you want to be like, who are the people you want to sort of stay away from, and what sort of person do you want to be, and it's actually shaping your character. And I go to grad school, and I have people who were actually anti-Christian as professors, and they were shaping my vision in ways that I didn't realize at the time. Sometimes I did. I was intentionally going to try to be a Christian intellectual through all this, but there were still all sorts of ways in which their values and just from methodology to something broader, some broader vision of who they thought they were and what they thought the project was that they were engaged in, all of those sorts of things were shaping me. So when we come to a place like Lee, what I like about Lee, the reason I'm very happy to be here, is because I get to be intentional about that. And at a non-Christian university, I just couldn't be intentional about that in the same sort of way. I taught at a university before I came here that is it's in the top 3 in the nation for its humanities program right now. And they were, they're known for it's the University of Chicago. They are known for their liberal arts education. And yet their liberal arts education was functioning on this sort of notion that, well, we have some great books and you can pick that core class or that core class and you can read some of these great books. And this is sort of a liberal democratic setting, and it's just somehow there's going to be an engagement that's going to bring out the best in you. You need to be a free thinker. I'm not going to tell you what to think. You be a free thinker. Lurking behind that is something that came out in The Dead Poets Society, if anybody's seen, I'm sure many of you have seen this movie, where Robin Williams is the professor at the sort of elite private academy. First thing he says is, rip out the introduction. It's going to tell you how to read poetry. I want you to read for yourself. I want you to think for yourself. And that's sort of the delusion of most teachers. I just want my student to just be I just want them to think for themselves. By the end of the movie, you have a bunch of little people who are thinking like Robin Williams, right? And of course, if we're honest, we actually want people, yeah, we want to allow for a range of freedom of holding positions, but we want them to think well in certain ways. If we didn't think we thought well, we'd need to drop out now, right? So we think well. We think we have good ways of parsing out the issues, or looking at a text, or looking at an issue, or looking at data, or things like this that we think, doggone it, it's pretty good, right? And so we do want to instill that in our students. And so in fact, I think that a place like Lee just allows us to this is the Dixon Center Challenge. We can take our mask off, right? I mean, we can just be, okay, forget it. I'm not, look, let's just be totally honest about what we want out of this whole project. I can talk openly about the ways in which my faith affects the things that I'm learning and the things I'm thinking about, and the way it's made me struggle in ways that I wouldn't have had to if I didn't have faith. It's made me do extra intellectual legwork. It's not cutting a corner, as I was told at non-Christian universities. In fact, it's adding actually a layer of complexity that actually sharpens my mind in all sorts of interesting ways. But in any case, part of the goal of this is just to encourage you to be intentional. This is a lifelong project that I hope to be engaged in. I hope you want to get engaged in. If not, you're sort of losing out on this place. There are places that will pay you more to teach less. I mean, why are you here, right? I'm not trying to talk you to, okay, I quit, Really, I mean, this is a goal. I mean, it is such a beautiful opportunity to bring all that you are to the task of teaching and the task of learning, scholarship, teaching, mentoring, submitting to others. It's a really golden opportunity. One of the ways to be more explicit about what it would mean for formation, then I'm going to stop. One of the ways to be explicit about formation, though, that I would encourage you to do, just think about it in all sorts of ways, and I encourage you to have conversations with other professors in other disciplines and asking them how formation might work. But one particular way that that has piqued my curiosity is thinking about virtues. Because I used to just ask, well, what do I want? What's the ideal student? The ideal student is somebody who's just brilliant and is able to. They have mastered everything all the information that I gave them. If the question is about formation, though, then the answer to the ideal student question needs to change. I want my student to be a good person, for instance. What sort of virtues might I want that student to have for them to be the good person, the good graduate that I hope they are? And then how does everything I do, intentionally, unintentionally, the practices I have, the ad hoc conversations I have, the events I go to, everything that I do, that I might do on this campus, how does that inculcate virtues, particular virtues? And you can ask the question of moral virtues, but I would encourage you to also ask the question of intellectual virtues. This is something I am still exploring. I plan on not arriving at any answer until about the time I'm ready to retire at the age of 75 or something like this. But I am, it suddenly it adds a whole level of excitement for me to what I do as a scholar, but also as a teacher. If I can think about questions about what sort of intellectual virtues am I expressing when I go into the classroom and I teach Greek, for instance, and we're reading Homer's Iliad right now. Tremendously difficult Greek for these poor students who came out of New Testament Greek, and then they have a summer to try to recuperate, and then suddenly they're dropped into reading archaic Greek poetry, which is a mix of various dialects of Greek and everything. I mean, it's really quite it's a way of pushing them off a cliff and seeing if they can swim once they hit the water. But so what sort of intellectual virtues am I inculcating in that sort of class as I am sort of, metaphorically hovering over the student and showing them, look at this, and think about this, and what posture am I having? And so am I inculcating intellectual virtues of, for instance, patience? Because quite frankly, half the time, I am not patient. I have so much on my plate, I'm just trying to get it done, move on to the next thing, and we have a rat race society at large, and then Lee it's a heavy teaching load, and there's all sorts of things that you want to be involved in. Students are facing the same issues, by the way, as prioritizing and things like this. Are we teaching them patience? And what would that look like as an intellectual virtue? Are we teaching them courage? And how does that show up as an intellectual virtue? Are we teaching them charity or love? How does that show up as an intellectual virtue? There are people that I disagree with strongly. I think they've got weak positions. How do I show the intellectual virtue of charity when I'm engaging with their position, when I'm reading their scholarship, etc.? So these are things that I hope that we are coming from all vastly different disciplines in some respect. Some of you do things that I just never wanted to do with my life. Nursing and business and math. I'm looking at you guys out here. I just did. And I would do terrible at it. But the amazing thing is, though, is that there is something that is shared by all of us, and that's this teaching as apprenticeship, as formation. And I think that this is something I hope that you can get excited about, thinking about the ways in which the intellectual virtues might show up in your particular discipline with your particular students. This is something that then we are part of just a much larger project. This is not about information. That was easy. In some sense, that was easy. This is much more difficult, challenging, and, by the way, hands down more rewarding. Mm-hmm. It just is.
Can I add
I can end right there, and you can transition into a
Sure, I
conversation.
had a thought of maybe adding a bookend to this marvelous chiasmus. So foundational principles is one thing, but one thing that shouldn't go without saying is also the end of it, the purpose of it. And this is something that actually gives a Christian institution such a tremendous leg up. I mean, it's so marvelous to be at a place like this, because in most institutions you can be in a position of not exactly having a good answer to the why questions, not being able to deal with those or deal with your students' questions, because that's what all the students ultimately they want to know the whys, and also having to try to find the answer to the why question that your own particular discipline or the people you're around are what's in vogue right now. Whether it's, well, your discipline needs to be something noble, like, you need to turn your discipline into saving the planet or to serving the poor, or something like that, or something totally ignoble, like you need to squash all the bad thinkers, the bigoted bad thinkers that disagree with you, whatever it is. But we have a ready why, an answer to the why that totally frees us. Think about the fact that here, we don't have to at all be afraid that our particular thoughts or positions are going to come to naught, because since we sort of ascribe to the idea that, as cliche as it sounds, that all truth is God's truth, that is to say, since we know that the source of all knowledge and all wisdom is in Jesus Christ, there are no surprises with him, so that if it turns out that we've been wrong all along, we can be okay with that. We can say, oh, well, Jesus wasn't surprised by that, and so I can change my mind without some fear of an identity crisis that probably, if you don't have that foundation, you do. We can say, we don't have, for example, take a hot button issue. The questions like evolution or age of the earth or something like that. We don't have to be afraid. The people, how some parents want to drive a wedge between science and faith or something like that. And we can show our students that we don't have to have this kind of deep fear. We're not the ones that are afraid, because if something turns out to be true or not true, or if our minds are changed, that's okay. It wasn't a surprise. It's not like God's mind was changed. So when our students are looking for the, more and more I'm convinced that the ultimate answer to the ultimate why, you keep on going down the regress, but why that, and why that, and we're looking for this deeper and deeper purpose. I'm pretty convinced the ultimate answer to the ultimate why is not a proposition, it's an exclamation. It's doxology. The ultimate purpose for whatever we're doing or thinking or saying, the ultimate reason, the ultimate answer to the ultimate why, isn't some statement, it's just, And that gets us I think that gets any scholar kind of giddy. You discover something, you teach something to your students, and if they're going, wow, then we've gotten to the deepest part of the deepest answer. We may not have gotten very, may just have nicked it, but those moments where they say, wow, those are the doxological moments, and those are the things that are kind of the ultimate purpose, I think, of the educational endeavor. It's doxology. It's the ultimate purpose of everything we do. That's when people say, what's the chief end, glory of God. I think that's what it's getting at, it's doxology. It's worship. And there is that.
We can open it up for discussion. I just have, so along the lines of what I was saying is a question that sort of bridges the gap between what we both said, and there's really not a gap, but what disciplinary standards or values are most seductive in your discipline for you? It was a question that I thought came out of what John was talking about. And what might be the practices in how does a formation of character provide a way to resist those? That's something we don't have to talk about it necessarily now, but I hope that that's a question you walk away with and mull over for like 10 years.
I'd say we've got time.
Yeah.
If you took like 30 seconds and jot down or something, what's the, in your particular discipline, what would be the biggest thing, temptation in people in your discipline that makes them dream something other than the kingdom of God? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah. Or you guys can say anything you want.
I just wanted to jump in. Thank you. There's lots of great lines from both your presentations. I'm sure you're aware of Marsden's book, The Soul of American University, which is kind of a reverse way of thinking about some of these issues. I just pose this as a thought. When we use Christian and then we plug in a noun, it sometimes doesn't get at what we're trying to get. A friend that worked with me at West Palm Beach at Palm Beach Atlantic, and he just thought using Christian University just is inappropriate because you got to be a believer, you got to have a soul, and so now Soul of American University. So I think what you two have done is try to articulate some of these things, formation, not information, dream big dreams. I think that's getting closer at it. I wonder if there is a better way, a quick way to say that this kind of education is different from brand X without resorting to Christian. And I get that. It is a convenience to say that, but it doesn't capture all the layers that you two have just gotten to.
What do you
big
suggest?
dreams. Well, I guess, you have to be pretty clunky, whatever
Yeah.
you come up with to get at it. One day I was giving a speech and I said I'm an Orthodox Christian, and then all the high church people said, oh, okay, good, you're with us. And what I was trying to say, no, I'm talking about, I'm a Christian that has understanding of traditional, it used to be called fundamentalist. Well, that's a hot term that you don't want to use these days, whether you're a jihadist or a Christian. So how do you say, I believe these things? These are the essentials of the faith that mark me as a believer. So I don't know, but I just throw it out there that there might be, somebody, good thinkers might be able to come up with it. Do you think it's worth thinking about or no? Do you follow the idea?
Yeah, the thing is the label's not going to work. At some point you just have to carry on the conversation, right?
I guess we're, in my field, writing, journalism, and communication, we're always talking about Christian journalism.
Right.
As if, and I would maybe go back to something your secular buddies would say, you know what that means to me? That means that you got to be great. You got to source your stories. You got to make sure you quote people accurately. You got to, even if you totally do not like the person with whom you're talking, you got to be really fair and give that person, so when the people read the story, they go, I don't agree with either of these people. So there's something about excellence there that, for me, is important. And I'll stop here so other people can talk.
So it's like that quote from Luther. You mean the Christian
right.
shoemaker thing?
Shoemaker.
The
Be the
Christian
best.
shoemaker is not someone who paints crosses on the shoes, but it's just someone who makes the best dang shoes. That's a paraphrase.
What's the German for day?
That is German, Dan.
I think, particularly in journalism, people are dealing with ideas. So they're thinking sacred, profane. And I think in higher ed, we're thinking sacred, profane. But I don't know. I wouldn't know how you do it. We're in, instead of Christian year, we're a sacred university. No, that doesn't do it either. But I think it is part of this conversation that you're having.
I get what you're saying, and I think it's right. What terms are appropriate, I don't know about that, but there's something very radical, almost scary, in what we are suggesting and proposing, which is to say that in essence, what other people are calling, if the endeavor used to be, how do we take education and make it Christian education? What we're saying is, no. True education is Christian education. Insofar as it's good education, it's Christian education. And the other kind of education is just warped. It's messed up. It's lacking. And in as much as it gets it right, we can say, hooray, you're doing Christian education.
You just don't know it. Yeah.
You don't know it. You don't realize it. But you're doing Christian education. Now,
Which is why it then sounds so weird to use Christian. But the only thing,
Christian
I could
liberal
think
arts.
of faithful education or something, but again, that would be just as abrupt and awkward and, to say faithful.
Memorial Hospital has determined their mission down to 4 words. And I think it's what you all are talking about. If we could get down to 4 words, I think it's pretty tough. Not that we would agree on it necessarily, but it's follows the acronym of RICE, RICE, and it's reverence, integrity, compassion, and excellence. So the reverence is to God, the compassion is to other people, and then you've already talked about integrity and excellence quite a bit.
Right.
If you can get down to 4 words, that's pretty close in my mind. But that's
Yeah.
their mission. That's, they don't name themselves the Memorial Reverence, Integrity, Compassion, Excellence Hospital.
Yeah. So you said we wouldn't all agree. I just want to be somewhat resistant. So the word for virtue in Greek is the word for excellence, right? So arete, it just means excellence. So a few years ago, I was in a pop-off moment, and she had asked me to do it, so I blame her, but where I critiqued the use of excellence in the rhetoric of a Christian university, because excellence has come to be just a marketing label that gets slapped on, and we actually don't know what we mean when we just did that, but we used a marketing label, and now suddenly my students aren't just students, they're consumers or they're clients or they're customers, and then this is just a business. I know for some business people that suddenly made university teaching exciting, but for me it actually, I wrestled with that a little bit more. So that's why, so excellence always needs to be defined, I think, in distinctively Christian ways. And even compassion, by the way, needs to be, it is embodied in a very particular narrative of God and God's people that we are continuing to this present day, as well as integrity and reverence. Anyway, I like each of those elements.
They have definitions of them, but I don't.
Yeah.
I just remember the 4 words.
Yeah. You had your hand raised, Dr. Smart.
I was just gonna mention, you made me think of what we talk about in business ethics. There's this view that don't bring God into the workplace. Well, the truth is the workplace is God's place.
Yeah.
Business is part of God's world. God didn't somehow invade business. And that's along the lines of what you're saying here, that education is God's, world. To somehow secularize it is a departure, and that we shouldn't feel like we're trying to then intervene and bring it out. It is God's world.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
And I think, I completely agree with you. This would be part of the way that our vision is shaping what our students do. Because otherwise they are going to think, oh yeah, there's this sort of value neutral place. That's the secular sphere. And so, did I bring my religious values into it? Oh, well, maybe that was nice. But in fact, no, that's God's place. And you are carrying God's work on in that place, or in the political sphere, or in the hospital, or in the mathematics classroom or whoever else is here, right? I mean, there is no secular space. If Daniela Augustine was here, which she shared it with us last time, she always quotes this guy, Alexander Schmemann, who is Orthodox with a capital O, Orthodox, who says there's not an inch of the planet's surface that God doesn't say, this is mine.
That's
right. That he
I think that's
this
Kuiper.
is my.
That's
No,
Kuiper.
she says it's Schmemann.
That's
I'm looking
Schmemann.
at the theologian.
There's not anything in the world that the incarnation has not touched.
That's
Oh,
Schmemann.
that's what she says.
Kuiper says
I
there's
combined
no
Kuiper, yeah.
okay.
Anyway, thank you. Yeah.
I think one thing that we face in nursing is the seductiveness of higher education, because we're losing so many nurses at the bedside. And then we want to encourage them to go on, of course, and further their education. We did. But we have a severe nursing shortage, so we're trying to implement service. I feel like that was something instilled in me at home, but not necessarily in my undergraduate program. And I feel millennials have a really hard time thinking, I'm going out here and I'm going to serve. They don't want to start with the baths and the beds and the things
Right.
that make you a Christian, part of, that just combine your Christian faith into your nursing care. They already are looking to the next step. And we want to encourage them to move on education-wise, but we also have this huge service need that we need to fill.
Yeah. I mean, this is part of where it's not just information, it's going to be narrative, it'll be stories that you tell, anecdotes you have, the ways in which you say you want to see somebody who I think is the model. It's this person doing what looks like the most menial, low-end job. That's the person I'm proud of. That's who I hope you become. So if you can say those sorts of things, you speak, so that there's almost a guilt if they go on, right? They actually say, oh, well, I don't know if I should do this. And of course they should, because every inch is God's, right, as they continue on. But that is something, I think it's absolutely vitally important, because I can have a student who goes off to graduate school. I have an instance of this, goes off to graduate school, doing really well, lost their faith in the first semester. In some sense, I just say for me, that's a tragedy, because for Christian faith, that is the thing that matters most at the end of the day. And so, as opposed to somebody else who ends up going and they're a manager at Denny's or something like this, and you're like, okay, well, that's what he did with his humanities degree, but living out the gospel and inhabiting, by the way, a very interesting universe that most Denny's managers don't have, because he's reading philosophy and great literature and things like that. And so I have to be comfortable saying, that's what I'm looking for, is that person who's inhabiting this very interesting universe and living a life that is always bound up with sort of, Dr. Kahn uses this phrase of living out one's questions, especially the questions that one has with God, and the questions God has of us. Where are you? What do you have in your hand? I mean, if you go through and look at the questions God asks in the Bible, these are identity shifting questions that he has.
And all this, since all of this is a practice, and obviously we're not going to go away with, well, this is the answer. If you can just believe what we're saying here, you got faith in learning or something like that. This is something that's practiced constantly. And as soon as we do it, I'm thinking of, who was it, Brother Lawrence, that monk practicing the presence of God. His life was a habit of thought and of work, a constant habit. And as we do this, things start to connect. We connect it with our notions of calling, and we start to ask ourselves, do we actually believe the things we're saying? If we actually believe that calling is not just a job, but calling is a person, calling a person and saying, you are mine. That's not what we mean when we say calling. We say that God is saying, I know you by name, you are mine. And here's what I want you to do. Well, if we suddenly mix that with false dreams that are in total conflict with the kingdom of God, saying, well, we say that about calling, but then real calling means the better and better, in the eyes of the world, the better and better job, in whatever discipline you are, what material success looks like, we are utterly contradicting ourselves, or we are allowing ourselves to know that what we say is not necessarily what we believe. There's that Jamie Smith mentions that Russian movie where there's that room. There's an independent Russian movie, The Room, where people go and it will give you your heart's deepest desire. And at first they say, oh, I want to go there. And then they get fearful because they're not sure that what their heart's deepest desire is what they think their heart's deepest desire is. And it's kind of fearful. Well, by practicing these things and by constantly having conversations with one another, we start to reveal to ourselves, oh my goodness, if I judge my practice and if I judge the habits of my pedagogy, I'm not actually teaching what I say I say it one way, and then I teach them the opposite. I tell them, calling is God calling you and saying, you're mine, now go do my bidding. And I'm telling them, you need to dream bigger dreams. I'm giving them utterly conflicting notions of calling. Which one is going to stick? The devotional I gave, or the thousands of examples through my work, through my actions, through my under-the-radar pedagogical practices, through the posters on the wall, to the things I recommend they read and look at. I'm still spending time examining what are the thousands of unexamined practices that are shaping my students in ways far more significant than the chapel service that was so powerful in the moment and then gone the next day.
Could I throw in, go ahead.
It's okay.
Go for it.
I'm going to push back at you just a little bit.
Please.
Because I'm hearing you say these dreams. Who gives these kids these dreams? And I have to believe that it comes from God. And I think when you tell your students, do the best to your best of your ability, whatever dream God gives you, do it. I think that may need to be the thing that we say to them. So, when I'm hearing dreams, I'm a firm believer that God gives you those dreams, or you wouldn't be having them. So,
But
it's just
couldn't
my-
it also be socialization in America?
It
Watching
could
High School
be.
Musical, 1, 2, and 3.
It
and-
could be.
Yeah.
It could be. But then that's where our job comes in.
There is something where you need to test the spirits to know which
No,
are
I know
which
that.
are of God.
But what I'm saying is, I don't think it's bad to dream those dreams. I think they're from
Yeah.
God. And then that's our job, to give them the tools that they need to discern what's what. And I just wanted to say that.
It's very good.
Yeah.
So what we need to be constantly doing is, we have to examine, and don't misunderstand me to say that dreams aren't bad, but as long as they're locking into the ultimate dream, which is, I don't know, think about what it is for yourself, but for me it's the kingdom of God. One thing I desire, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life and behold the beauty of the Lord. This is my big dream. And if what I'm teaching my students is in conflict with that somehow. So, if God wants somebody to, I'll just say, if God, well, no, I won't use that example. But whatever dream it comes, as long as, but I have to be aware that their dreams, yes, they come from the Lord, but the Lord uses us. We can't deny that we are planting dreams in our kids' minds, in these students' minds. We are giving it to them. For example, students don't decide. I never decided when I was young that the theologians who always got it right were from a particular century, were mostly Scotsmen. I didn't decide that. I was taught it through example. The theologians growing up that were always put before me were mostly Scotsmen. And later on, I learned about all these other theologians, and I said, when did I decide that those were well, that's because those are the ones that were always put before me. So if we put before our students' imagination, this is what it looks like to be happy. It's the shopping mall all over again. If we are constantly showing them, these are your saints, then what kind of dreams is God going to give them? They might just come away saying, that's what it looks like. So we have to at least examine the pictures that we're putting before them of what the good life is.
I have to say that it's getting to be after 5, and I love this conversation, and I promised Eric he could say something.
Yeah.
I know some of you've got to go, but I will say this: I spend my days thinking about this stuff, and for me, thinking about what does it mean in a Pentecostal, in a Church of God, institution, and there's something that cuts across everything that we do that gets at who we are, at least for me. So no matter if you're teaching nursing or if you're teaching Greek, some might say, oh, this is dumbing down. But no, if you start with the foundation of excellence in whatever I'm doing, then that next step for all of us is, for me, what does this mean, talking about the Spirit, is are you at the bedside exhibiting love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, which always goes back to, am I emulating those things in front of my students? I think we should be really scared if we're getting things wrong in terms of theology or origins or whatever, if we treat people with whom we disagree badly. But if we're humble and we're kind and we love them, regardless of our disagreement, then we don't have to fear if we were wrong. You know, we're all out here trying our best and hope we get those things in the secular world. That can be viewed as an excuse to do less, when if we look across everything we do, viewing that as the next step in every discipline that touches all of us, that's unending, that quest to do those things. So thanks for giving me 87 seconds. Sorry.
Yeah, so these guys are available for lunch if you want to continue the conversation. If you don't have a lunch ticket, I'll give you one. Not you guys.
What?
Thank you very much.